what is rejection? We sabotage ourselves by telling ourselves a story that we make about who we are. Ultimately, we end up in a place where we reject ourselves because the rejection comes from us, not from other people. One of the biggest mistakes that we make when things inevitably aren't going well for whatever reason in our relationships, in our work, in our businesses, in our performances, we feel like we are the ones that are broken or not doing well. Keep moving towards the thing, because most people react to rejection by retreating. They stop applying for jobs, they stop dating, and they stop trying, all because of a feeling of rejection that they told a story about that became about who they were instead of what happened. Every meaningful thing in your life requires rejection, otherwise it doesn't really mean anything. What would you attempt if rejection didn't mean that something was wrong with you? Facts create clarity, stories create suffering. So the question, what facts am I ignoring because I'm too busy believing the story? So what can we do about it? The first is, hello and welcome to the Johnny Lawrence podcast. My name is Johnny Lawrence and I am coming to you today on a very hot day. It's one of those very hot days here in the UK where everyone's complaining about the heat after spending most of the year complaining about the rain. It's a very British thing to do. Before I get into today's episode, I had the most wonderful weekend. I watched my brother get married this weekend. I was best man. And it was just the most fabulous thing that I've done in a really long time. Just sharing the room with two people that are so in love, bringing the whole family together, watching them obviously get married. It was just fabulous. So I just want to say congratulations again to them two on tying the knot. What a wonderful, wonderful weekend. You must be very, very, very pleased with the result. And I'm proud of you both. Probably more so Holly, because she organised everything and it went like military clockwork, which is ironic because it was actually at a military base. So there's that. Anyway, so congratulations to them and what a wonderful weekend. But today, I want to talk about something that I know everybody experiences. It's something I get asked to talk about quite a lot, in fact, but it's something that I've recently had quite a significant experience with, and that is rejection. And today, I'm going to talk about why rejection hurts so much, what rejection actually is. I'm going to talk a bit about rejection sensitivity, because I know that word gets thrown around quite a lot these days. And I'm going to offer 3 practical ways to move through that experience. But I mentioned that I've had that experience recently. And as everybody knows, I have a book coming out very, very soon. Beginning of next year, hopefully, if all things go according to plan. And part of that process is, the process is absolutely amazing. It's a really cool process watching something that you spent so much time creating come to life and to have other people involved in it. It's the first time in this process where I've had anybody else involved in this process. So, everything from the title of the book to the cover designs to the main part, which is the editorial, which is the bit I'm going to talk about. So there's something called a structural edit, which is basically where you hand over your entire manuscript, your entire book to somebody who's a professional editor, and they look over your book and then they offer feedback. They offer stuff that they feel that you could do better, change, eliminate, all that stuff. And it's very, very practical. That's their job. Now, I received that recently, and firstly, I want to say that absolutely everything in it was right. It turned out I'm pretty much done now on the structural edit, but everything in it was right, and I got this incredible feedback, and it was, this is not turning a bad book into a good book. This is turning a great book into a bestseller. You really have got something here. I said that from the beginning because I don't want to give people the impression that there was anything wrong, because there wasn't. And that's the point of this episode. But yet when I received my structural edit, I had a full body rejection reaction. It was savage. And the reason being is because, as I just said, I've spent 3 years over that now writing that book. Researching, collecting ideas, gathering stories, checking that my stories from my past were right, finding out some of them were very confused. There was a therapeutic journey attached to all of that too. This is one of the hardest things I've ever done, is write this book. There were so many times that I gave up and said, right, I can't do this, But the thing about that book is it tormented me. it haunted my dreams. I kid you not. It was waking me up at all sorts of times of night with different ideas and suggestions and problems being solved and problems being suggested and models being created and acronyms. And oh my God, that it was full on. And this went on like literally every day for 3 years. And the whole experience was, now I'm on the other side of it. It was amazing. But I have spent my whole time on my own making this book, creating this book, and then I hand it over to somebody. And it's everything I have learned about all of the really difficult things to do with emotions, to do with who we are, what we want, what drives us, the fears and the needs we have, and the environments that we surround ourselves with. The whole thing is just, it's something I'm significantly proud of and actually very confident is going to have a very big impact in the world. But then I get the feedback, and I knew it was coming. I wanted the feedback because when you spend 3 years doing something like that, you find yourself in a position where you're no longer able to see it anymore. You just can't be objective anymore. The example I like to use was when my son was born, we decided that we were going to paint his nursery white. And the room, I can't remember what color the room was, but it was a darker color. So the first coat we put on and the white went over and we could see where we needed to do it again. So we went over and did the second coat, no problem. By the time we get to the third coat, fourth coat, the wall's white. And you can't really tell where you need to put more white and where you've done and where you haven't done. And it becomes really, really difficult. And that was like where I got to with this book. So it needed somebody else to look at it. But yet when I received this structural edit, which I was really excited about, I didn't receive it with gratitude or excitement or curiosity, unfortunately, which is all the things I wanted to receive it with. Actually, what happened was I felt deflated. It felt like someone injected me with self-doubt. And ultimately, I felt rejected. For some reason, I thought that I actually didn't think this. This is the thing. It's not a rational experience. I knew that there was no world where this was going to come back and go, yeah, perfect, nailed it. Never written a book before, but yet your book is perfect. There is no alterations needed, no changes. No, you're good to go. I absolutely knew that, and it would have scared the life out of me had I received a report like that. I knew that wasn't going to happen. I knew there were going to be changes. And as I said, all of the changes that were suggested were absolutely necessary. They have made this book something else. They really have. I'm beyond excited, but I'm not going to get into that energy because I'm trying to talk about how I felt when I received the structural edit. Because here's the thing, right? Rationally, and here's an important reflection, nothing in this structural edit suggested that I was a bad writer in any way. Nothing at all said that, in fact, totally to the contrary, nothing at all in this said that the book was bad. Yet my emotional brain interpreted it that way, straight up. Oh, I've got this back, this, and it made me feel overwhelmed. It made me feel deflated. It made me feel like I was worthless, and all of the old script from my father started running in the background, started coming back. All of the, you're making a fool of yourself. Who do you think you are? Oh my gosh, is that really what you're doing? You're putting a book out. Everything is going on right now. It's all happening all at once. You know how rejection feels. You know what it's like. You know what that inner mind chatter starts doing. So you understand what I'm talking about when I say rejection. But let's just press pause a minute. What is rejection actually? Because rejection isn't necessarily being unwanted. Rejection is actually often the gap, the space, the bit in between what we hoped would happen and what actually happened. It's the bit in between that. It's that space, that void, that no man's land between what we thought would happen and what actually happened. Now, here's the silly thing. When it came to my structural edit, what I thought would happen, I didn't have a thought about what would happen, which I suppose is kind of dangerous in itself. Or if I was to think about it, what happened is exactly what I thought would happen. So it's kind of bizarre, right? But it just shows you how primed that rejection is all the time. But common examples of this would be you hoped for approval, but you received rejection. You hoped for connection, but you received distance. You hoped for an acceptance and you received a no. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that's what happened. In fact, most of the time, that's not what happened. Actually, what it means is the way we interpreted what was said. There's this really great rule that I have. When I see people doing something, for example, say somebody wants me to come and listen to a song they've made or read an article they've written or look at a social media post or whatever it is. I have clients that come to me with all sorts of things. If they appear to me to be very emotional, then I will reflect that emotion back to them. I won't come at them with any logical criticism. I match the emotion with the emotion. And it's the same if they come at me logically. If they come at me logically and without emotion, they're just looking for practical advice or tips or insight or whatever, then I'll come at them with that instead of emotion. Because if you try and match logic with emotion, it can feel like you're pissing on someone's bonfire. Equally, if someone comes at you and they're in a space where they're like, right, okay, I'm past the excitement phase now. I just need some practical advice on this. If you come at them with loads of emotion, it doesn't feel helpful to them because then that's not what they want. They want you to give them a bit of criticism, perhaps, or a bit of structured criticism, not your thing is crap or anything like that. But I suppose ultimately what I'm getting at is that most rejection hurts because reality didn't meet expectation. Because as human beings, we're hardwired for connection. We seek connection. We seek belonging. We want to be together. We want to be sociable. Again, just coming away from a wedding this weekend and being around family and friends. And it filled my cup, man. It was just absolutely incredible. And hopefully you can actually see that energy in my podcasting today. So we are definitely social creatures. And a very, very long time ago, instinctually, tribally, whatever you want to call it, as part of our survival mechanism, rejection was like a red flag for us. Rejection was there to make us look at ourselves and shape up, because rejection in some cases meant exclusion. It meant that we were kicked out of the group. And there was a time in human civilization where being alone wasn't safe. It wasn't safe to be on your own, to be part of a group with so much danger around us. Being part of a group was safety. So to be rejected from the group was actually a very dangerous thing to experience. And I suppose our brains carry remnants of that survival mechanism, that survival instinct. Therefore, negative feedback can feel threatening because you experience rejection. Being ignored can feel threatening because it feels like rejection. Being criticized feels like rejection, therefore feels threatening. So what happens is our bodies start to perceive this rejection feeling, this thing that didn't meet our expectations, as a threat. So it starts to treat it like a threat. We start to get those threat feelings, that anxiousness, that nervousness, that preparatory feeling of like, something's about to happen, I need to be ready, where we either decide we're going to fight the threat, we're going to run from the threat, or we're just going to freeze. And there's something called rejection sensitivity. That's really quite an important one. And a lot of people who experience neurodiversity, they talk a lot about rejection sensitivity. And let me tell you, it is a significant experience. It's like nothing that can be articulated. The sense of rejection is devastating. It is bordering on a mental health crisis for some people. It really, really is. So I speak about this with utter compassion. And if I'm honest, I know a little bit about it. I've got a lot of neurodiverse people in my life and I've seen it, and it's been really helpful for me to look into this because it helps me manage other people better so that I can, sometimes you can't take away that feeling of rejection, but you can certainly make it a little bit easier for them in some ways. But what is rejection sensitivity? It is a high alert towards rejection or the signs of rejection. It is like on another level. Everything is turned up to 10. So that's how it feels to have rejection sensitivity. And those people are in a constant state of high alert, always looking for signs of rejection. They're sensitive to it. They want to prepare themselves for it at all times. So they're looking for it in everything. And sometimes that means they make meaning out of things that don't actually exist. For example, they send a text message, the person doesn't reply. That must mean that they're annoyed with them. And then a whole story starts in that very moment. Their boss at work wants a meeting with them. It must mean they've done something wrong. They're going to get fired. A whole story starts about that. Someone gives them constructive feedback and all they hear is they're not good enough. And then they make a story out of that, how they're not good enough. And this is what's going to happen. And their life's going to end up in chaos. Or really these days, it happens a lot with young people. They put out a post. It doesn't perform the way they expected. And they translate that as people don't like me anymore, or I'm not good enough, or I'm bad in some way. So what I'm getting to is that the event happens, then the story begins. And that's the bit that's important because most suffering comes from the story, not the event. Going back to my structural edit that I received, feedback arrived, and then my brain created a meaning about what that feedback meant. So when they give me back their feedback, they're saying to me that this bit here isn't as clear as it could be. If you pitched it in this way, then it could be a lot clearer. And quite often that was using images. They were saying, this is quite a complicated thing you're talking people through. Maybe if you presented it in an image or presented it in this way, it would be a lot simpler for people to understand. They're absolutely right. They nailed that. And I'm really grateful for that feedback. However, what I took from it in that moment was, this is rubbish, which is not true. And now I'm on the other side of it. It's actually laughable. But at the moment, I really wanted to give up, which sounds really illogical, but that's how it felt. So I think we've really understood what rejection is and rejection sensitivity. So what can we do about it? Well, here's some things that we can do about it. The first is we've got to separate the facts from the story. As I said, the story gets told as soon as the fact presents itself. Something happens, the event, and then we start telling the story. So the first thing we have to do when we experience that rejection is we have to press pause and we have to ask ourselves, what happened? What happened? What really happened in this moment? Not what am I afraid of happened, not what do I think happened, not what might happen, what actually happened. Again, using my book as an example, book submitted, editor reviewed it, suggestions were made. These are the facts. But yet the story was, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I've got this wrong. Maybe this book just won't work. And then you throw some fuel on the fire. I've got my dad's voice in my head. You're making a fool of yourself, blah, blah, blah. All of that's coming up at the same time. And it's the perfect mixing pot, the perfect storm for a massive rejection meltdown, which is a little bit what happened. So what's the lesson from that? Well, facts create clarity. Stories create suffering. So the question has to become, what facts am I ignoring because I'm too busy believing the story? Number 2, do not turn feedback into identity. This is really important. This is what we do. This is what we do. One of the biggest mistakes that we make is we turn our work into who we are. We turn our performances into who we are. We turn our relationships into who we are. We turn our businesses into who we are. So when things inevitably aren't going well for whatever reason in our relationships, in our work, in our businesses, in our performances, we feel like we are the ones that are broken or not doing well or wrong or whatever it is that we decide to assign to it. Again, bringing it back to the book, the manuscript needed work. And that didn't mean that I needed fixing. It meant that the manuscript needed work, which was obviously the point of the editorial in the first place. But I jumped into that story and I started identifying with that story, turning that story into what it meant about me instead of what it meant about the manuscript. Because here's the important part. Something can need improving without you being inadequate. I know. Something can need improving without you being inadequate. I wrote a book. I handed it in. There were improvements needed. It had no reflection on me whatsoever. However, that's not how I felt at the time. And then lastly, keep moving towards the thing, because most people react to rejection by retreating. They stop applying for jobs. They stop dating. They stop creating, and they stop trying. All because of a feeling of rejection that they told a story about that became about who they were instead of what happened. Because every meaningful thing in your life requires you to risk rejection. Otherwise, it doesn't really mean anything. This podcast that I do, I'm risking rejection. What if nobody listens, right? The documentary I made, what if nobody watches it? The coaching business, the coaching service that I put out there, what if nobody wants to work with me? And then finally, this book that I'm putting out there, what if nobody buys it? What if nobody cares? Worse still, what if people buy it and they hate it? All of this stuff risks rejection. It's all a possibility somewhere in the ether. So really, I received the structural edit. I look over it and I've got 2 choices. I either withdraw, give up, or I make the improvements. Only one of those has growth attached to it, because the cure to rejection isn't retreat, it's participation. We have to buy into it. We have to go into it and go, okay, I've got this feedback. Let's action this feedback and see what happens. Most of the time when you do that, you're told, that's brilliant. That looks much better. Well done. Let's go with it. And we're back on track again. But instead, we sabotage ourselves. We sabotage ourselves by telling ourselves a story that we make about who we are. And ultimately, we end up in a place where we reject ourselves, because the rejection comes from us, not from other people. And that's the important part. We have autonomy here. Now, I'm not telling you can take away the feelings. I'm not sure you can do that. What I'm saying is you can manage this rejection experience so it doesn't derail you. That's what's important. So to close today's episode, rejection is an event. It's not an identity. People can reject your ideas. They can reject your proposal. They can reject your content. They can reject your application. And that does not determine your worth. See, the feedback I received on the book wasn't proof of failure. It was proof that the book exists, that it's real, that I've done something, and ultimately that the process is moving forward. And as I said, I received that wonderful feedback. This is not turning a bad book into a good book. This is turning a great book into a bestseller, which brings up other feelings of uncomfortable feelings for me, but we'll keep going. So I suppose the closing question that I want to leave you with today is, what would you attempt if rejection didn't mean that something was wrong with you? Great question. Anyway, thank you so much for listening today, and I'll catch you next week on another episode of the Johnny Lawrence Podcast.